MMORPGs always seem to spawn a myriad of in-game myths and legend. I think it's got something to do with the diversity of experiences that different players will have depending on their class, time in game, or server. EVE is a little unique in that it's all one server and there is no class selection mechanic, but over 20 years of EVE history has led to several waves of myths spread amongst the player base. These are unfortunately more prevalent the newer you are to the game, as you'll lack the necessary experience to spot when someone is just talking completely out of their ass. So let's try debunking some of those myths. Myth number 1. It's too late to start playing. Hang around in Rookie Help or other Newbro-centric channels and it won't take long until you hear something to this effect. It's an understandable conclusion to come to when you encounter the early brick walls in EVE, whether that's financial or skill point based. Existing players have a terrible habit of talking to Newbros about the loftier long-term goals of the game. It helps them feel more accomplished and experienced, a bit of a brag essentially. But make no mistake, it can really put off Newbros. I talked about this a bit in my video on burnout, but it's so much better to focus on short-term goals at first. Maybe a long-term goal in the back of your mind isn't going to hurt, but telling the Day 2 account that they only have another year of training to go until they can fly your favourite ship is not going to help at all. In reality, the game is absolutely bursting at the seams with players who started recently, and it's not just crammed with 20-year-old accounts as some would have you believe. Besides, this all stems from a pretty fundamental misunderstanding of EVE's progression. Unlike most MMOs, there is no XP grinding or item scaling. The frigate fits I fly around faction warfare and the skills that I use to do so on my 4-year-old EVE account are absolutely no different to those that you can acquire within a week or two of playing. That's just talking about one playstyle too. If you're taking part in larger alliance or corporation fleet battles rather than small gang or solo PvP, then your barrier of entry is usually just whether or not you can sit in a ship. Very few groups would rather see you in station spinning during a fleet than sitting in a ship you can't fly perfectly. There's more to be said about the gap between new and existing players when it comes to ISK, but honestly, still, it's less about raw amounts of ISK harvested over a longer period of time, and more about the game knowledge that comes with time, leading to a better understanding of how to make ISK faster and with less effort. I still remember clocking in an 8-hour day with a procurer in HighSec when I started playing this game, just to be able to afford a little condor for a corp filament roam. Had I known what I know now, I would have gone and huffed gas in low-sec for all of 5 minutes to achieve the same result. So if you're holding back from playing EVE because you're worried about everyone else having a head start, then yes, there is a head start for some players, but only in the same sense as any other skill or interest. Everyone started somewhere, and most of them started more recently than you think. Myth number 2. You have to multibox to make any money or win fights. Multiboxing is always quite a contentious topic, but the loudest voices are unfortunately usually those with the least understanding of it. I can totally understand why from some players' perspective it feels like there's a finger on the scale of the game in favour of multiboxers. It's really not that simple though. Multiboxing is a term that encompasses a lot of different playstyles that have absolutely nothing to do with each other. Some players multibox so as to have a scout in another system or to check gates while travelling. Others purely use a small army of similarly trained characters for mining and ratting in order to fund PvP activities on just one account. And finally some, usually the most visible kind of multiboxers, fly multiple ships at the same time in a PvP situation. The thing to remember is that no matter how good a multiboxer is at their craft, they will never outplay that same amount of real people in PvP. I've watched some people with APMs that would make my joints ache, but in reality they are often dismantled with a couple of cheap jamming frigates. The frustration around multibox PvP players usually stems from the fact that they require different tactics to contest, or that they are especially capable of harassing small groups who have little experience with their weaknesses. I do have my issues with the impact multiboxing has on the ISK generation and economy in general, but the important thing to focus on is that you absolutely do not need to multibox to make good money. Farming ISK in EVE is almost always a function of the amount of mental bandwidth you're willing to put into an activity. At the very lowest level you probably have high-sec moon mining, maybe Ishtar spinning a touch higher than that, and these are ways of generating ISK that do not require much active input. Many people playing EVE with just one account will see these activities and then glance over at what multiboxers are up to and feel like the deck is rigged. Trust me when I tell you that multiboxing any activity is an exponential scale of mental bandwidth, even if the underlying activity is a fairly brain-dead one like Ishtar spinning on Forsaken hubs. In reality, even if you play with just one account, you can also seek out activities with a higher mental bandwidth and more assets and space that pay out better ISK. It's just that rather than scaling a low effort activity into multiple accounts, you do one higher effort activity on one account. Good examples of this are finding and huffing gas, running higher tier data and relic sites, or doing higher tier combat sites including DDs and escalations. Don't let the fact that you're only using one account hold you back, as I assure you that the opportunities to scale your ISK are out there, they're just in a different place. Myth number 3. Everyone is out to scam you. We have the media to blame for this one, unfortunately. While espionage and scamming in EVE are very, very real things, if you're the kind of person paralyzed with worry about it, I guarantee you're also probably not the person scammers are looking to catch. Not to mention, the avenues through which you can be scammed are pretty limited, and it's very likely you'll never engage with them at all. You could wear your heart completely on your sleeve for most of your time in EVE, and very rarely be impacted by attempts to scam or mislead you, so all it takes is the occasional sanity check and not instantly clicking accept on anything people send you in order to stay safe. There's some toxic groups in EVE, but harassing new players is heavily frowned upon, and in some cases, strictly prohibited. It is precisely because of the trust you have to put into other players that EVE is such a unique game in which players form incredibly tight bonds, so at some point you're going to have to go ahead and trust people. I've unfortunately met plenty of players who came into the game hyper defensive about this and who never really allowed themselves to trust anyone else in the game. They completely miss out on the community aspects of EVE and harbour an extremely toxic and bitter resentment to the majority of the game's players. Myth number 4. Corporations are just stealing my income. This is a particularly funny one actually in my opinion because it's a bit of a paradox. No, the vast majority of corporations aren't just there to sit on a pile of ISK accrued a few % at a time from tax money. But ironically, people that tell you corps are just stealing your income are the most likely to be just stealing your income. Again, unfortunately disproportionately affecting new bros who haven't played enough of EVE to understand this, there are swathes of corps you can find in the recruitment pages in-game or spamming TradeHub local chats that advertise themselves as a place to go with lower tax than the default NPC corporation tax that's 11%. They often specify in their descriptions or adverts that most corps are just out to steal your money, we're different and we only charge 1% or something to that effect. If the only selling point of a corporation is how low the tax is, you can be quite sure that they're going to collect that tax, however minuscule, every single month and do absolutely nothing else with it at all. The reality is that a good corporation should both generate income and use that generated income in ways that benefit members of the corporation. It's through taxes that ship replacement programs can even exist, industrial infrastructure can be built, and leg up acceleration programs can be implemented for new players joining the corp. Those are just some examples from my corporation, but depending on the area of space a corp lives, there'll be various investments that benefit from the economies of scale that are really only available when a corporation pools the contributions of its members. I would say to new players and existing players alike, don't be afraid to ask your corporation or alliance leadership where the corporation's income is being spent. I personally have made corporation spending completely public and transparent to members of my corp in a monthly report, every single month for the last 3 years now. Any director or CEO worth their salt should have no hesitation in explaining to you what your tax money gets spent on. Myth number 5. Corporations are spying on me with ESI. I can tell you from experience that third-party corporation HR programs are an absolute necessity once a corp grows to a certain size, and that size is a lot smaller than you might think. I'll give you a very basic example scenario. Another member of your corporation shoots and kills your ship. Blue on blue combat. You'd probably expect that player to get kicked, right? Maybe even get your ship reimbursed or something similar. So the CEO of your corporation or a director logs on and kicks that person from your corp. You undock and go about your business, and it happens again. It was an alt account of the same player. That kind of thing can rinse and repeat unless directors have a way of associating each alt account with a specific player. Could that be done without ESI? Sure, but this is just the most basic of examples. For something a little more complex, maybe you agree with a fellow corpmate to give them an officer module, and in return they're going to give you a bunch of Plex. You get into a station together and you do a player trade, but after you've accepted, your Plex vault looks a little light, and you realise the amount of Plex being traded to you was missing a 0 off the end. You tell other members of the corporation that someone is playing dirty and scamming their own corp mates, but this other corp member just says you're lying. It's your word against theirs, right? Not with ESI. Such things are recorded and accessible to get the facts so your CEO and director can resolve the dispute. The biggest reason that trumps both of those previous examples, however, is background checking, and that's probably the first encounter you'll have with ESI tools. While high-effort spies can be a true challenge to filter out during recruitment, the bar is held substantially higher thanks to tools like Seat and Alliance Auth, which both use EVE Online's ESI tools to let you get a quick overall picture of the kind of activities a pilot is skilled into and interested in doing. It lets you see at a glance if they're going to fit into the playstyle and community that your corporation is going for. I have always had a sneaking suspicion that the vast majority of people who are opposed to using ESI tools simply have a few extra spicy rage EVE mails in their sent folder that they don't want anyone else to see, so maybe think twice before going on an unhinged gamer rage through in-game mail, because those mails form a semi-permanent record of your conduct in the community, and recruiters will use this as a judge of your character. Before anyone starts throwing out privacy arguments, it's a video game. Nothing sensitive outside of in-game data is shared other than your IP address by necessity of connecting to a web server, which you can just use a VPN if you're truly that privacy-minded. I understand the concept. I'm very privacy conscious myself, but the contents of your EVE wallet, contracts, or EVE mails are all in-universe and not even slightly comparable to their real-world equivalents. Myth number 6. EVE is dying. I feel like this one had to be included as the longest lasting myth of the EVE community so far. Obviously one day it will be true, but it's funny how many people resist picking up this game or quit on the basis that it's on death's door. I can speak from experience as I was one of them, and it's why Reddit doom posting about EVE especially gets on my nerves. My first time actually trying EVE was in 2018, and unfortunately I decided to call it quits after just a couple of weeks, on account of the constant sentiments about the game being weeks or months from death all over the EVE subreddit. I was of course not familiar with the EVE is dying meme in the way that I am now, but it's generally posted by people for whom EVE is maybe just not quite the right game. I've even noticed this trend in my comments section on previous videos. I've seen people comment that EVE died in 2012 or that they quit a few years ago because EVE is dead, and yet here it still is. And funnily enough, here they still are watching EVE videos on YouTube. So just remember, if you see people talking about how EVE is dying, it's more likely that just one very specific gameplay style that they enjoy has changed in the last update. EVE is by its very nature far too varied and complex for one person's experience to reflect the health of the game overall, so take that kind of talk with a pinch of salt. Thanks to Jasmine for this video idea by the way, and let me know if you guys can think of any more myths about EVE Online. I'm sure there's a lot more, and it'd be interesting to cover some in a future video. Until then, see you next time. If you want to help support the channel, consider buying your next EVE Online pack, subscription, or Plex from marqueedragon.com using the link in the video description. Use coupon code BILL at checkout for 3% off your order. I've also got YouTube membership enabled now. I've only recently become eligible for it, but the plan is to include some member-only videos and probably a Discord server or something like that. The only perk for subscribing right now is a badge on YouTube, but it's 99 cents if you'd prefer that way of supporting the channel.